Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Julie Emery Johnson, and I am a senior partnership consultant with Educate. We are so excited to have everybody join us today for a conversation and coffee. So grab your favorite cup of coffee and sit back and enjoy just a snapshot of professional development or professional learning conversation. We will honor the hard stop of 45 minutes. We will also share out the recording and we'll share out any resources. So everybody has the links to go check out the research and some of the things that we're talking about today. We're very excited to have our special guest, Lynn Holdheide from the American Institutes of Research. And without further ado, Lynn, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll dig in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Glad that you were able to join us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. This morning, just to kind of give a little context, I'm going to comment about the impact of the pandemic, what it means for the educator workforce, how it can be turned into an opportunity, the kinds of professional development teachers need right now at this time, and last, how CARES Act funding and CRRSA funding, the funding that came out in December, and hopefully the funding that will be coming out from the Biden administration can be used to provide high quality PD for teachers. Before I go on, I wanted to talk a little bit about, let me start again. Before I turn to what I believe are opportunities, I wanted to talk a little bit about what COVID has presented in terms of the challenges that we are experiencing right now and what the implications are to the COVID workforce. I am the director of the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders at the American Institutes for Research. Been doing this work for around 8 years, and actually more than 8 years, but under this center in 8 years. And we're a national center that has helped state education agencies really take a look at their educator workforce issues. And you know, it's ranged from the evaluation of educators and teachers and leaders to really examining shortages and diversification of the workforce. So anything educator, teacher, leader quality is what we address. Obviously, when COVID came aboard, we started to get very concerned about the impact on the teacher workforce. And I think many in the country have not really thought through what the overall impact will be because we're just treading water. We were closing down schools in the spring, thinking and hoping that we could open them in the fall, and it's been a hybrid going back and forth. It's been a tough end of last year and a very tough year this year. And I think it unfortunately may get a little bit tougher when we think about the workforce. But I'm hoping that the things that we've learned, the innovation that we've experienced, what teachers have done, what districts have been able to do, what states have been able to do, is something that we can carry forward when we, quote unquote, go back to normal. Because there are definitely a lot of lessons learned from what we've been experiencing, for sure. We learned that teachers have innovated. We learned that students are learning in different ways. But we've also learned that teachers are overwhelmed. They're full of a litany of resources they're not sure how to use, nor do they have the time to use them. They're worried about reaching all students. We know the impact of the educator workforce as well as the pandemic on student learning is really impacting the most marginalized student populations there are out there that were already being impacted in so many ways. So there's just so many things that we need to start thinking about. It's not perfect what we've done, but we've done better than I think people had anticipated in terms of teachers stepping up. I am worried, though, that teachers, because they're overwhelmed, that we're going to have a huge attrition problem. I'm already hearing across the country that teachers are retiring early. We know that teachers were already not entering the workforce in mass numbers before. We're likely to see that happen even more so. And mostly I'm worried about the teaching conditions for teachers and working conditions, not for just teachers, but leaders too. Teachers have been working around the clock. They're trying to meet the needs of all their students. They're trying to reach them. They're trying to be online 8 hours a day, which can be exhausting for both the students and the teachers. They're trying to mitigate learning loss, and all while they're trying to learn how to do this. How do we provide virtual learning for students? How do we do a hybrid? How do we make sure that we're contacting those students in most need? And how do we make sure that learning? And so that's what I'm going to talk about, a little bit about today. And even though I kind of talked a little bit negatively about COVID, I do honestly believe that this experience has forced us to do things that we've always wanted to do when it comes to virtual learning and supporting students, all types of students, and being able to differentiate instruction.
So, Lynn,
I
how do
do
we
think,
turn this crisis into opportunity? How do we do
yeah,
that?
I think that's the question, right? How do we turn it into an opportunity? I think the first thing we have to do is ensure that we're providing high quality professional learning for teachers so they feel very supported. No teacher goes into the profession not wanting to help students. And right now, I think they're worried they're not, that they're worried they're not going to be able to make up the learning loss. They're worried about their students being at home all day, not being able to reach them. So we really need to be able to support teachers, both emotionally and socially. And there's a lot of supports about that. But I'm going to talk more about what kind of professional learning can we provide for the teachers. We know high quality professional learning is hard to do. We know it's not a one-stop day, and we've heard that for over a decade, if not longer, but we're still there because logistically it's really hard to provide high quality professional learning. If you want high quality professional learning and you want changes in teacher practice that teachers feel good and that can be successful with their students, you really need practice-based opportunities to practice what they've learned, and in many different ways. It can't just be knowledge getting. One thing that I've always said is if we're going to bring teachers together and we're going to take them time out of the classroom, let's use it wisely. Teachers too can listen to a podcast in the evening on their own. They can get knowledge on their own, but what they won't do or can't do or don't have time to do is practice and get feedback. And so instead of having knowledge development activities where you have a webinar or you have a training sessions that's all day telling you about, I don't know, multi-tiered systems of support, do that through a virtual webinar that they can watch on their own, or have asynchronous modules that they also can do on their own when they have time, and most importantly, when they have the need. Teachers change practice, we all do, when we have a need. We learn something new when we have a need. We practice something new when we have a need. And by providing that kind of learning asynchronously, I think there's just more opportunities to really connect with teachers in a different way. Plus, it allows teachers then to also select what kind of professional learning they need. And for district leaders to be able to pinpoint, looking at their evaluation data, looking at their observation, looking at their experiences, and try to pinpoint what type of training is most important for them. That way we can utilize all the resources that we have to really get into the coaching aspect. What you see here on a screen is what are the essential features of practice-based opportunities. Modeling, obviously. Modeling spaced learning, and what I mean by that is learning over time. If we are only supported through one coaching session after a PD day, we're not going to change practice. It's impossible. We have a hard time changing practice in every aspect of our life. But without spaced learning, spaced opportunities to practice over time with continued support, it's very unlikely that it's going to change a practice. Varied learning is important too. Learning with different kinds of student populations in different contexts is very important. And the last two are the most important, that coaching and feedback, and that analyzing and reflecting. That time is so needed, especially right now. And we actually have an opportunity to do it virtually. We're learning more about virtual feedback. We're learning more about observations and being able to record them and load them up on a platform so we can provide feedback that's, real time, sitting down with a teacher after they've gone through what they've done. And right now, if they're doing virtual learning, you have the recordings right away available, or could if you're hitting record, that you can provide immediate feedback to teachers. With the virtual aspect, with the coaching and the feedback, it opens up some more doors. It limits the cost, brings costs down if you can do it virtually. But it also allows for time. It doesn't take necessarily time for teachers out of the classroom, but gives them other times to provide that feedback. I really, I mean, I know we talk about bargaining agreements and collective bargaining and so forth, and teachers wanting to stay within the school day. But honestly, I don't know a teacher that doesn't want to get better, that wouldn't be willing, not that I'm saying they have to, but wouldn't be willing to meet after a school day or even in the evening to get some feedback. If we can make it more real time, I think it's going to just be better for teachers. And right now, it couldn't be more important. Teachers need to feel comfortable with what they're doing in a virtual learning environment or a hybrid learning environment. And professional development is really a good way to help them feel comfortable in general. Julie, did you want to chime in with a question?
No, I was just saying, absolutely. That makes so much sense. I think that having that real time support, and also it's very individualized and personalized. And I think, that's a little bit of a shift from some of the PD that we've had in the past. And right now, everybody has had to shift their focus, their instructional focus. And some, have different skill sets than others. So the types of support, what that looks like on an individual basis varies. And that's why coaching is such a good solution, because it is individualized. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those shifts and those instructional shifts that have taken place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to follow up on that. I think it's different when I think of personalized professional learning. It's different than going out and each individual selecting what they want to learn about, which we've done too before, where you can get CEU credits or whatever it is within the state to go attend a class or what have you. This is different. It's more personalized. It's more based on what the evaluation is showing as teacher needs. It is a little bit harder to implement, but if you find good coaches who know instruction, it shouldn't be. If you think about it, if you've got asynchronous modules, and there's plenty around the country, the U.S. Department of Education has supported a large number of national centers. And I tell people all the time, use, plagiarize, take all of those materials instead of using the funding to develop your own. Use them, and then you can personalize a little bit better, because a good coach can coach on a lot of things. Right. So if you have a teacher who needs support with managing behavior in a classroom, or a teacher needs to support with reading instruction, they can learn about it asynchronously, and then they can get the coaching and the practice-based opportunities through an effective coach that can really help.
Absolutely.
The type of instruction we're doing now is different, right? We're trying to connect with students virtually, making sure that all students are engaging. How do we assess the students? How do we know if they're learning what they should? And how do we make sure that all students are staying pace? And then how do we differentiate? I actually think differentiation is easier now than it's ever been when we think about virtual learning. And I think that's something that I would love to see go forward in the years to come, even after the pandemic is done. But I wanted to just highlight this resource because I do think it is valuable to think through, how do we mitigate some of the main barriers that are happening with distance learning and virtual learning. And if you see here, there are 6 main barriers here, and I think they should probably resonate across the board. Barrier 1, how do we keep students focused and engaged? Virtual learning is tough, especially if we're expecting students to sit and look at a computer for 8 hours a day. We can't even do that, let alone students. Making sure that students feel connected and that their social and emotional needs are addressed. A huge concern for teachers right now, especially for students that may not be in connection with the teacher or may not just be showing up. How do we work on that? Students are just as overwhelmed as our teachers are. This is a new learning environment for them. It's hard for them to keep up. They don't have somebody sitting beside them every day, managing and helping them manage their workload, helping them think through. And I don't know of a teenager that doesn't get on the computer, that doesn't get sidetracked with trying to look at something else, or Facebook or whatever social media that they're using. I shouldn't even say Facebook. My kids would laugh at me. That's so out for kids. But if they're using any kind of social media, they can get distracted. How do we make sure that they're learning so they can process and retain new content? This is no different than what I talked about for our teachers. We can't expect students to hear and be able to do. They need just as much practice as teachers do, if not more, and they need to have that practice across different learning environments and different experiences that's varied with coaching and feedback. And that's very important right now. And then what do we do when we've got students with and families with a wide range of technology skills and experiences, which everyone is experiencing right now? And I'm not talking, we decided not in this actual resource to not address the technology needs from hardware and access, because that's a different issue. We're really talking about they have the internet, they have some technology capability, but they might be struggling in how to utilize it well. And then, of course, facilitating family engagement. This is a whole different level of family engagement, and I think it's a good level. We're seeing more and more families, either whether they wanted to or not, much more engaged with their students' learning, talking with the teachers a lot more frequently. But this brief is designed to really help think about what are teachers in for today and how is their learning different, and providing some tools and resources to do so. We did base this brief on what are called high leverage practices. This is something that the GTL Center and the other center that I work on, the Cedar Center, has been working a lot on. These are high leverage practices that we know can support all students' learning, most particularly students with disabilities, that if all teachers could come out of their preparation program knowing how to utilize these, there's 22 of them, 22 practices, we would really shore up core instruction well, so that we would have less students that need more remedial support, resource support. We'd have less students who need to come out of the classroom. I think one of the things that I've noticed in my work on educator quality in the last 20 years is in the beginning, no one talked about instruction. I felt like we were moving deck chairs, and I'm like, if you're not focusing on instruction, we're not doing anything for any benefit for anyone, not the teachers, not the students. And I firmly believe that to become a good instructional provider, it takes a lot of time. To become an expert takes at least 7 years. We can't assume it's going to happen just within the prep programs alone, that we have to continue to support instruction. And I do believe that these 22 practices, if we could shore those up, core instruction would be improved, and we'd have less and less students who need additional support. What this brief does is take those high leverage practices and situate them into the virtual learning environment. That being said, they're appropriate for any learning environment. So within each of the barriers, you'll see steps to how to implement those HLPs, and then these are just a sampling of those. And then you'll also see some online apps that can help too. What I mentioned before about blocking social media, strict workflow is just one example. And we tried to pick out technology tools that were free, that had been vetted through Common Sense or some other platforms. We also want to recommend that teachers try to utilize the ones that are already existing in the school. We also recognize that you can get blown away if you're a teacher by all the different types of apps that are out there, that you should singly choose one and use one at a time with your students and with the teachers. But we do believe that this allows a good way for teachers to really think through, how can I get to these big barriers that we're experiencing and worried about with our students? Now, all that said, is right now, and certainly in the spring, there were so many lists of resources coming out to teachers, and they're all in good intentions. But there isn't I personally was overwhelmed. If I saw one more resource list, I was going to come and undo. And I'm not going to say that I haven't been part of resource lists. I have one right here. So we really need to think through not the list, but the supports for teachers. And that's why I think Julie and Lisa reached out to me to begin with, because I was talking about, we can't keep giving lists to teachers. Teachers don't have time. They are struggling. They're keeping their head above water, and they're concerned. We need to set up professional learning environments where they can start to try some of these different tools and technologies, and then come back together and talk about it and get some support from folks. Because if any of us had time to sit down and really learn and practice at night, we'd be thrilled, right? We're just surviving. So if we were to enter, say we introduce this one barrier, and we say, okay, this month, all of our teachers are going to work on trying to mitigate this barrier one, trying to keep students engaged, and go through some of these strategies and offer and try some of these technologies, bring them back to a professional learning community, maybe a week later or 2 days later, and have them discuss, how did that go? what were your challenges? What are some ways to mitigate that? I also think that we have tons of expertise within a building or within a district that we need to leverage as much as we can. There are teachers, ESL specialists, there are special education teachers, there's technology specialists, there's instructional specialists that are ready and able to support, most particularly around access issues for students. So forming a professional learning community that's real time, that provides that continual support, I think is key right now. We can't assume that teachers have the time or the ability to learn all this stuff at once and be able to implement. I think we need to give ourselves the grace to go one by one and not think we need to change the world all at once. I mentioned we have 22 high leverage practices. When I work with states, I said choose 5 because you can't change 22 at once. And if we're only going to change 5, select which 5 you think are most important and do those and support them. Then you can take on the others. And sometimes that feels funny. People are like, well, what about this? What about this? What if we're going to miss this? And I think that's true. All of us want to be the best that we can be, but we're not going to be good if we're trying to make too many changes at once, especially if we don't have the support systems there. How do we fund this? I mean, Lynn's living in a fairy tale world, right? How can we actually fund this kind of supports? And I wanted to bring up the CARES Act funding, and I should have changed this and I forgot about it. This is HEROES Act. When they were doing the HEROES Act, now it's the funding that was given by President Trump in December, and then hopefully the funding that's coming through with President Biden. There's pretty liberal use of this funding. And I want to recognize that. And I also recognize that the initial sets of funding was really to make sure that there was connectivity, that people had access. Obviously, we need to worry about the healthcare of our teachers and our buildings. We need to worry about the sanitation, the ways that we're doing things in the schools. There's some real critical needs that are very infrastructure oriented. And I'm hoping that the first 2 sets of funding, we're really able to mitigate and utilize that funding for that. And I'm hoping that this additional funding that hopefully will be coming through Congress soon will be able to be targeted towards teachers in their professional learning. We've got everyone in the world worrying about learning loss. Me too. But you can't keep adding more time and more days to students and teachers and expect them to learn more. Granted, more time is always good, but right now, we are expecting teachers and students to be on their computers way too long for what's normal. And to add more time of the day to that, and for summer school, it's not a bad thing, but let's also shore up core instruction.
I was going to drill down on that a little bit, Lynn. You and I talked about that earlier. And I just wanted to mention that again, because one of the things that, we're hearing a lot, the U.S. Department of Ed had a call last week talking about that learning loss study, the CREDO study, and they were really talking about wraparound services, after school tutoring, summer school, pull-out services. And somebody had the good sense on that call to say, but the teachers have the kids 7 hours a day. Like, let's focus on instruction. Like, the biggest piece of the pie, let's give those people the resources they need and the supports they need to really pivot to these new sort of instructional shifts that they're having to adjust and adapt to. So thinking about that, really taking this money and not necessarily trying to add new layers, but investing in that big layer that's already there, I think is such an important message, to just kind of get out there. And then it does link to that fear of teacher attrition. The teachers also need to feel that they're getting support, that they're a priority, and that support is real time. I think that good intentions go a long way with other educators. Speaking as an educator, when I feel like people are understanding that I have a need and they're making efforts to address that need, it goes a long way in the
Absolutely.
of the work that I'm doing. Yeah, and just general morale. So just wanted to chime in.
I'm never gonna knock community support, after school support. I think any of that is always good, but I think I mentioned this to you when we talked. I think the same in preparation. You can be in a residency program for 7 years and still come out not being prepared if you're not careful. Adding more time doesn't necessarily equate to better. It can, and certainly more time spent in instruction, good quality instruction is helpful, especially for struggling learners. I'm not going to say it's not, but let's really focus on core instruction and how can we shore that up. It sounds trite, it sounds maybe easier than it is, but right now we have what I call an inverted triangle when it comes to multi-tiered systems of support. We have more kids needing more and more supports from out of the general education classroom or in addition to, and that's just, it can't be. It's an impossible infrastructure to support. We have to be able to turn that and make sure that we have good quality instruction that 80% can meet and learn with that core instruction within a general education classroom or within even a virtual learning classroom. Otherwise, we can't use our specialists the way that they're designed to use. And our specialists should be able to come in and really work with those students that are really struggling, not because it's core instruction, but because they have a learning need and they need additional supports that's very specialized. The CARES Act funding and the funding that hopefully we're getting is pretty broad. You can use it for professional learning. You can use it to set up technology to hire and recruit new staff. And then this last bullet is like huge, right? Anything that's under IDEA and ESSA. And I just wanted to point out, when it comes to the educator workforce, you can provide mentoring and induction. You can do teacher leadership. You can provide professional learning with these funds. And as I mentioned before, this can be just-in-time professional development. I think it has to be. We're going to lose our teachers if it's not. We've got to be able to provide little snippets of teacher, not an 8-hour day, but here, at your leisure, when you have time, watch this learning, develop your knowledge, and then we're going to come together, we're going to discuss it, and then we're going to try one practice, then we're going to come back together. Something similar to this, 45 minutes. Get it in and come out, and then see what you can provide in terms of the coaching support, real-time support within their buildings. The funding is there to do that. I realize there's a whole lot of other issues, but hopefully with this additional funding, especially if it goes through how Biden has put it in, there's a lot of funding there. Let's think about how we can use it to shore up our instruction and support our teachers.